Hello everyone, my name is Akanksha and welcome to my YouTube channel, Neuro Chat with AG. On this channel, I plan to cover topics that are closest to my heart and support the neurodiverse community. Topics related to neurodiversity, autism, late autism diagnosis, and autism in women and girls. I will interview thought leaders, esteemed researchers, scientists, professors, doctors, and psychologists and seek their views and updates on their latest work and research. I will also chat with parents of neurodiverse kids and adults and talk about experiences of neurodiverse individuals. Lastly, keeping inclusivity as a topmost priority, we might also discuss controversial disparate views for a collective understanding of issues and respect for diverse views. All the views and topics discussed are for informational purposes only. If you are interested in watching more quality content on this topic, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to press the bell icon to be notified whenever a new video is uploaded. Please also share the channel with your friends, family, and social media platforms. Thank you.
Mr. Raun K. Kaufman, an international lecturer, author, and co-creator of the Safe to Connect Autism approach and the Autism Crisis Turnaround Protocol, which pioneered the concept of the Neurocrash, is also the author of the award-winning book Autism Breakthrough, the groundbreaking method that has helped families all over the world. The former CEO of an international autism training nonprofit, Ron has spent well over 25 years working with families, children, professionals, and educators from over 100 different countries, using innovative neurodivergence-aligned autism approaches built around a true understanding of the autistic experience, including his own autism journey. As a young boy, he was diagnosed with the so-called severe, non-speaking autism and recommended for lifelong institutionalization. Defying the pessimistic prognoses, Ron's parents worked with him in a totally new way they developed, enabling him to blossom, grow, and ultimately accomplish everything his parents were promised he would not. And a best-selling book and award-winning television movie were made about his journey. Now a graduate of the Ivy League Brown University with a degree in biomedical ethics, Ron conducts lectures and seminars worldwide and was a recipient of the Best Presenter Award at the National Autism One conference, given to the winner of a nationwide survey. Ron has written articles featured in journals such as The Autism File and Good Autism Practice, and has been interviewed by media channels such as CBS Television, NBC Television, National Public Radio, BBC Television, Fox News, The London Telegraph, and The People magazine. Mr. Kaufman, welcome and thank you very much for the time today.
Thanks for having me, Akanksha.
So you've had quite a journey with autism yourself. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So as you were discussing, right, I was diagnosed with, what they use different language, and we're talking about the 1970s here, right? So they called it severe. They called my condition hopeless. I was non-speaking at that point. And I not only non-speaking, but even when they did things like hearing tests on me, I appeared deaf. They were convinced for quite a while, not my parents, but the diagnosticians were convinced that I was deaf because I'd also had very severe ear infections as a little baby and almost died. So they had like reason to believe that. But anyway, so yeah, there was a lot going on with me. I would spend hours a day rocking, doing different stims, right? Rocking back and forth and moving my fingers. One of my favorite things to do was to take a kitchen plate and put it on its edge on the floor and then spin it like a top while I would flap my hands and gaze at it. So I would do that for a long time. And yeah, my parents were told, see, it's very interesting. This is where the whole diagnosis versus prognosis thing comes in, because a diagnosis is really helpful for a lot of people. And it was helpful for my parents. But then came the prognoses, which is like all the, kind of what I call guesses about what that person is or isn't going to do or be able to do for the rest of their life. And my parents were told that, I was never going to learn to talk. I was never going to have friends. I was never going to even prefer people over objects. I was never going to go to school, or certainly in the long term, not, grow up and live on my own and fall in love and all of that kind of thing. It was just like not in the cards for me. And so, yeah, my parents were and still are, they're still alive. They're really amazing people, and they really believed in me, when other people didn't. But, not just believed in me. They took a really, at the time, it's not actually radical now, but you have to really get how radical this was, not just in the 70s. It was still radical if they had done it in the 80s or the 90s, which was really one, seeing autism as a blessing and not a curse. Again, this isn't going to shock people hearing it now, but this was not the way it was viewed back then. So that's number one. Number two, really cherishing and enjoying all the aspects of me, all the autistic aspects of me, versus having this idea of like, how do we get him to be less autistic? That they, when I was doing a stim, instead of stopping the stim or trying to redirect it, which they were repeatedly told to do, they would actually do it with me. They would actually, so if I were spinning plates, my mom would get down next to me, not try and get me to stop, not try and turn the plate spinning into some other game, but actually get her own plate, sit down next to me, and begin spinning with me. And actually, it's interesting. So number one, she was told this was the worst thing she could do. She was told terrible idea. But what actually ended up happening was that was the first time I ever looked at her, first time I ever smiled at her, first time I ever started including her in my play was when she was doing that. And so that was the first kind of breakthrough that we had in terms of communication and connection. And yeah, so she kept working with me for another 3 years after that, amazingly. And as you said, I grew and I blossomed. I went on to do lots of things that my parents were assured that there was just no way I was going to be able to do. And I'm really grateful. And it's not just okay, I have some accomplishments that are kind of cool, but also I have just great people in my life, great relationships. I have an awesome wife, which I was not, that was also not supposed to be in the cards for me. I'm married to a really cool woman named Dilma. She's a absolute rock star, like a really good human being and just awesome and my best friend. And so again, that was just not supposed to be something that was even going to be open for me to participate in. And I don't want to make it sound like this is the only, I'm not trying to frame it like this is what success looks like, or this is the definition we should be using for when someone on the spectrum, has a wonderful life. I mean, lots of people have all different kinds of things. Temple Grandin, who you mentioned earlier, has a really different life than me and an equally wonderful life. And then there's other people who are having really different lives. Maybe they're communicating just by typing. And that's how they're communicating also with their friends. Maybe they're having a particular sort of job. There's all different ways to have a wonderful life. And actually that's one thing that, I've really seen is that, there's so many beautiful things about our kids and adults, and there's just lots of ways for them to enjoy and have a wonderful life. And a lot of times what happens is neurotypical people put that person up against some standard that they have for what a good life looks like, what success looks like. And then when the person on the spectrum doesn't measure up to that, they feel bad about it. They wish their loved one were different, which I promise you, your loved one on the spectrum picks up on that. They try to change the person, and the person often feels pushed and judged and stressed by this. And so there's another way to be with this. And again, now there's a really active community of autistic people and teenagers and adults who are online and on social media who can express their internal experience, what things were like with them, what's helpful and not helpful to them. And so now it's really easy to lose sight of what that might seem normal now. Like, meaning that might seem like just something we have now, which is great. And autism is reflected in lots of television shows and movies and different things. This was just not how it was. It was really not like this for a long, long, long time. So I'm very grateful to have had the journey that I had and to now be getting to work with lots of different families from all over the world. Like you said, over 100 different countries, over 120 different countries. And also just getting the chance to train people, other professionals, to be able to take like the Safe to Connect autism approach and really use it in there, whether they're an OT or an SLP or an educator or a teacher, be able to use that and be able to speak at conferences. So I'm grateful for it because it really gives me the opportunity to help people. This is what's important to me. Really help people to treat their autistic loved ones. Number one, the way that person wants to be treated. Number two, a way that isn't going to shift them into fight or flight and make them feel threatened and stressed and unsafe. And then three, open up opportunities for them that might not be open if we are dealing with our loved ones in a very, you know, autism is bad and we must change it kind of way.
Yeah. Thank you. Your story is really amazing, and I mean, reading about it and hearing it are like two completely different experiences. But
That is different. You're right. You're right. You're totally right.
and you've been working with autistic people and their families for almost 30 years now. So how has that been for you, given your own experience? And has your definition of autism changed through this?
Well, that's a great question. So this is sort of two questions, and both really good. So the first thing is just to know that, it is really special to me because I've gone through my own adventure, my own autism adventure. I'm still on my adventure, right? But yeah, so it hits me deep in my heart. Uh, but the other piece is like even completely apart from my own experience, I have so many people who I just love and adore who are on the spectrum, who I've gotten to either be a part of their lives or really help them in a kind of profound way, to really help families and parents love their children. Not that they don't love their children before I ever get there, but love them in a way that feels like love to the person on the spectrum. Like everybody loves not everybody, but 99% of people love their autistic children or adults, but don't love them in a way that feels like love to the person on the spectrum. And that's why a lot of times people on the spectrum can feel very unsafe and very stressed. And, people call them antisocial, but actually what's happening is they're just social people who basically are approached in such a way that relationships are so stressful that from the outside it looks like, oh, they don't want social connection, they don't want relationships, when actually what they don't want is to be in fight or flight and feel safe and feel stressed and feel attacked. And so that's what that looks like when we don't understand it. So for me, that's been, again, even if I had no experience myself with my own journey, I mean, who knows what I'd really think, actually. I don't want to pronounce it's an alternate universe. But to me, there is something additional to my own journey that feels like just my experience with other people that's been super profound for me and really, really meaningful. And yeah, I'm really grateful for it. Oh, and then the other question you said was, oh, how has my definition of autism changed? Well, actually, it has changed. There's a friend and co-professional friend of mine, and she's totally awesome. And she said something, she was on a podcast interview that I was watching of hers, and she said something like, every 5 years, I feel like I'm a completely different person with completely different thoughts. That's a quote from her. And it like hit me. I'm like, yeah, like that is how I feel. I feel like I've gone through entire eras of who I am in relation to autism. And so, yeah, I would say, look, right now, the way, and again, who knows where I'll be in 5 or 10 years, but right now, with all my experience and with doing what I do, I feel like there's some key aspects. This is where we come to, I mentioned this to you earlier in an email, of what I see as the five natural laws of autism. And I feel like that's kind of what autism is. Do you mind if I talk about that a bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So so the things, and by the way, I say me, but actually I'm referring to me and my colleague whose name is Kate C. Wild. She's written 3 autism books, actually. She's awesome, really amazing at what she does. And we've been working together for decades, literally decades. And we've been also specifically working together on our own, like away from any other organization, developing our own really important piece of this work, which is where the Safe to Connect Autism approach and the ACT protocol, Autism Crisis Turnaround Protocol conference comes from. So yeah, the 5 natural laws of autism is so the first one is where the name of the approach comes from, Safe to Connect. And that first natural law is that autistic people have to feel safe to connect. They have to feel safe to connect. This is so important because everybody is trying oftentimes to force the connection part. And connection can have a lot of meanings. I don't just mean being social, although that's a piece of it, but it could also include doing tasks, participating in activity, learning a new skill. Everybody's trying to get people on the spectrum to connect before they actually feel safe and when they don't feel safe. And that is deeply counterproductive. On so many levels, it's counterproductive because of how it feels to the person on the spectrum. That's the most important piece of it, which is that it feels scary, overwhelming, super stressful, even traumatizing at times. So that's one piece. The other piece is, even according to the values of a lot of the neurotypical community, it's still counterproductive because it doesn't actually get the outcome that a lot of educators claim that they want. Let's say the person doing the thing that they want. Not that I think that that's the end all be all. I really don't. But I'm just saying, even according to their standards, it doesn't really work very well because it ends up creating a person who's super stressed, has lots of something that I call neurocrashes, which is kind of related to meltdowns. We can talk about that in a little bit. But you get a lot of that. You get overwhelming neurocrashes. You get a breaking of trust where the person on the spectrum doesn't trust you, doesn't feel comfortable relating to you. You get an association of stress and pushing with learning, like so many counterproductive things, even according to the standards of like the school system and stuff. So it's really important that they first feel really safe, and any of us feel safe and comfortable, and that has to precede anything else. That has to precede anything else, and is actually the necessary prerequisite for connection, for all the aspects of connection. So they have to feel safe to connect. That's just the first natural law. The second natural law of autism is that autistic people have S4, which just stands for super sensitive sensory systems. And I'm really happy that this is more in the culture and more understood than it was 10 years ago and much more than 20 years ago. And this is, before it was really like people were just like, you've got to get him to stop acting out in this situation. You've got to expose him to the stuff that he's scared of or she's scared of or whatever. And it was like, again, super counterproductive and super stressful for the people on the spectrum. There is more understanding, not as much understanding as I would like, but more that our loved ones have super sensitive sensory system, and that like exposure therapy is not the answer. Like just putting them more, oh, he's stressed out at the playground and at school, and when there's lots of commotion, let's put her more in that situation so she can get used to it. This is really not the way we want to go with it. It's really important that actually first we reduce the amount of sensory bombardment and sensory input that's happening until we get to a place where the person's not overwhelmed. So anyway, that's number two. Number three is that autistic people have a powerfully heightened need for predictability and control, and especially the control. Predictability, certainly, but really control. And this gets misinterpreted like crazy, where people think that the autistic person is being demanding, stubborn, even spoiled. I even get, which is really not only wrong, but again, very counterproductive, because when you see the person as spoiled or being, pain in the neck and stubborn and trying to whatever, be demanding and controlling, when you see them that way, this is what happens with the people I work with. When they see the people on the spectrum this way, then their solution to that is they need to, or they're just not trying to be even demanding, isn't even the right term for it. They do have a heightened need for control, but that is because they are desperately trying to feel safe and to feel regulated. And when they have the control, they feel safe and regulated. So they're trying to gain that control so that they can feel safe and regulated. By the way, one of the reasons, there's more than one, but one of the reasons why, one of the things they're trying to do by feeling safe and regulated is to not have neurocrashes. And I promise I'll explain that in a minute. But I will tell you, the neurotypical community hates neurocrashes, right? I don't, but a lot of people in the neurotypical community do hate it. They're trying to stop it. They don't want meltdowns. They don't want hitting. They don't want yelling. They don't want right. So they do all these things to try and stop it. What's interesting is oftentimes the things people are doing to try and get that stuff not to happen end up making it happen more, because they're not understanding what's underlying. They're seeing everything in a very behavior-based way, which is just another thing that I would argue is counterproductive for people on the spectrum, because when you see things as a behavior and this is a behavior and I want to try and change it, you don't look underneath for what's really going on. You come at things from the outside and not the inside. So that's one problem with focusing on the behavior. The other problem is that uh, you are holding a person accountable for something they may not have control over, right? I always say this. Imagine if we scolded our kids, on the spectrum or not. Imagine we scolded our kids for coughing or sneezing. Now, I've never met a parent that does that, right? Because we don't. Of course, you don't scold someone for that because you understand that this is not a choice. This is an outgrowth of something happening inside, right? And that is also what neurocrashes are. So again, this is why this is so important to understand. But let me just back up a little bit because that's why this third area of our loved ones have a heightened need for predictability and control is so important. The answer is not to then break them of their desire for control, right? The answer is to actually help them do what they're trying to do, which is give them enough control so they can feel safe and regulated. Interestingly enough, again, just going by what neurotypical people say that they want, I've seen this over and over again. When a person on the spectrum is given enough control so that they feel safe and regulated, guess what? They actually get more easygoing with doing things outside their comfort zone or doing things that you might suggest. They actually become less controlling, right? So that's not the reason. I don't think that's the ultimate reason why to do it, to give them control, because there's deeper psychological and just from a caring about the person perspective why you'd want to do that. But that is a pleasant side effect of it that I have seen over and over and over again that I don't see when people approach it in the like, we've got to break them of this. Anyway, that's number 3. Number 4 is that autistic people have an interoception disconnect. And for those of your audience that don't know what interoception is, I'll just do a quick two-pronged definition. One is there's 2 ways to see it. They're both very similar. Interoception is the brain's ability to detect and decipher signals from the body. Or another way of seeing it is the mind's ability to detect and decipher signals from the nervous system. So covers everything from knowing you have to pee, being able to feel that you're cold or you're tired or you're hungry or you're thirsty. But not only those things, also things like your emotional state, you're angry, you're happy, you're sad, you're scared, right? Being able to know that. And the reason I say detect and decipher is because they're separate things. So one is being able to detect it. So for instance, even working on something simple like toilet training, most people treat it as a behavior and they get told this, you just plop the kid down on the toilet many times throughout the day. Eventually they start going in the toilet. This is just not how it works, because if they're having an interoception disconnect, which almost everyone on the spectrum is to some degree, then what that means is they're either having a detection or a deciphering issue, which means they're either literally not feeling that they have urine in their bladder, like literally they don't feel it, right? Or they do feel it, they detect, that's the detection part, they do feel it, but they can't decipher what the feeling is telling them. So they're feeling something, but they're not deciphering, that it means there's urine in my bladder and I have to urinate. Right. So I know we're having an interview talking about urination, but really it's important because it has big picture implications because it doesn't just apply to having to pee, right? It applies to lots of different things. So there's the interoception disconnect. That's number 4. And then 5th and final piece is that autistic, and this is probably the least understood of all of them actually, is that autistic people are always in one of 3 autism neurostates. And this is a big part of actually what I work with people on, which is being able to really identify the 3 autism neurostates, meaning being able to identify when their loved one is in any of those states. Autistic people generally oscillate back and forth through these 3 states. The exact proportion of how much time they're spending in each state is going to vary from person to person, and not even just from person to person, but even in the same person, depending on their day and what they're being exposed to and things like that. And this is just very, very important. There are 3 of them. Like I said, they're oscillating between these 3 neurostates. And by the way, it's not just important to identify these, but to treat the person really differently depending on which one they're in, to essentially cater what we're doing to match their neurostate instead of either treating them like they're in a different neurostate or trying to get them to force them to switch neurostates, which does not work. Anyway, so here's what they are: dysregulated, regulated, and then least acknowledged and understood, regulating, ing there. So dysregulated, regulated, and regulating. Dysregulated is kind of the most obvious one to people, right? That's when our loved ones, children or adults, doesn't matter how old they are, but that's when someone is having what I would call and what Kate would call a neurocrash. So let me just define that because I brought it up like now 10 times. Basically, a neurocrash is when a person on the spectrum is exposed to imposed situations. Imposed situations are just basically circumstances or environments that they're exposed to without their say so. So when the person on the spectrum is exposed to different imposed situations that then build up to the point where it overwhelms their brain and nervous system to the point where their coping mechanisms shut down. And this is really important because our loved ones are implementing coping mechanisms all the time. And often what happens is we either don't notice that that's what's happening, or even worse, and this happens a lot, we actually try to stop the coping mechanism. For instance, what's one of the, not the only one, but what's one big coping mechanism? Stimming. It's stimming. And what's everyone doing? They're trying to stop or redirect the stim. Right? I mean, it's like, oh, it drives me crazy. And actually, Kate and I started separate from our actual professional work. We started I don't know what you'd call it. We might call it a movement. It's not designed to make money. In fact, there's no way it doesn't take money. It doesn't even take donations. It's like completely money free. We're just trying to change people's behavior, and it's called we call it the SSS movement, which stands for Stop Stopping Stims. We even have a website up for it if anyone wants to visit, called stopstoppingstims.com. Again, there's nothing on that website that's going to ask anybody for money. It's not what it doesn't even allow you to pay money on the website. But what it is, it's trying to build a movement of like, even if you're not going to do safe to connect, that's fine. But let's at least just stop stopping stims. Let's just stop that part of it. That would make a huge difference in the lives of people on the spectrum. And there, you can actually download for free from that page if you want to a detailed white paper that I wrote that's all about what stims really are. It's called The Beauty of Stims. It's what they really are, the purpose they serve, the ways in which they're magnificent, and then how to actually handle a stim, which, non-spoiler alert, it's not by stopping the stim. So anyway, stopstoppingstims.com if anyone's interested in that. But let me come back to this. So oftentimes they're doing coping mechanism. A stim is an example of one. And the coping mechanism is the only thing standing between that person and a neurocrash, right? And by the way, I described what a neurocrash was, but I didn't really explain what it looks like. What it will usually look like to an outsider, to like a neurotypical teacher or something, or a parent, is it will look like what people might call a meltdown. It might look like hitting themselves or other people, or it might look like screaming. It might look like curling up in a ball. But it's those kinds of things. It might look like just high anxiety. It could include extreme or explosive behaviors for sure. I work with a lot of families who are really struggling with that, actually. And one of the things that Kate and I help them to do is to implement something called the ACT protocol, which stands for Autism Crisis Turnaround. The crisis in that is not the autism, by the way. The crisis is the situation that the kid or adult is sort of trapped in, where they're stuck having chronic neurocrashes, which, however badly the adults or neurotypical people don't want autistic people to have neurocrashes, however badly those people don't want it, I promise you, autistic people want to have the neurocrash even less. That's why treating it like a behavior and then holding them accountable for it is so crazy, because they don't want to have it either, right? They're doing everything they can not to get into that situation. And yet we throw a lot of things at them inadvertently that push them there. One of the things we do is we take away their coping mechanisms that they're doing to try not to have it. But the other thing is that even if you let them do their coping mechanisms, which is way better, you still run into the problem of a lot of times the imposed situations in an environment build up enough that they're going to have a neurocrash anyway. They might have fewer, but they will still have them. So what we do there is we show schools and therapists and families how to implement the ACT protocol. It's a protocol, by the way, the ACT piece is it's a protocol, not a program, meaning it's not something you do for a year and it's about educating the child or the adult. It's not what it's doing. You do it for about 2 weeks, sometimes three, and it's designed to sometimes for the first time really help this person on the spectrum get into a deeply regulated place. Now, it is much easier for people on the spectrum to stay regulated when they're regulated than it is for them to re-regulate when they're dysregulated. So a lot of our loved ones, uh, they've never experienced being consistently regulated for, let's say, a week in a row. I mean, they might have experienced it for an hour, even 2 hours, but often not for a week because they're constantly subjected to environments and circumstances, imposed situations that make it impossible for them to function and impossible for them to stay regulated. And here's the thing, when you're constantly dysregulated on and off, then every bump in the road feels like Armageddon. So even things that might seem small, they can't go to the store that they want to go to, or their little brother or little sister starts crying, right? Things that we can't always help, right? Oftentimes that will lead to a big explosion, to ultimately to a big neurocrash. That is not because a neurocrash is like part of autism. This is another myth I hear a lot. Oh, well, I mean, you got an autistic person, you're going to have neurocrashes, you're going to have meltdowns. This is sort of how it is. Right? It's like part of autism. And that is not true. And I know it's not true because I worked with lots of people, lots of autistic people who have lots of neurocrashes. And I've also worked with autistic people who don't. So it's not an autistic thing. It's a thing that happens to autistic people when they're subjected to these imposed situations day in and day out that are constantly overloading their systems and stressing their nervous system out and just causing all sorts of mayhem inside of them. And then we're like, why are they doing this? So, this is what happens. So let me just get back to these three neurostates and then I will take a break. You can ask me whatever I want, whatever you want. But that's all just the dysregulated piece. In fact, the whole ACT protocol is just addressing the dysregulated piece. The other two, there's regulated, and most people are pretty good at spotting that too. That's when the person on the spectrum is comfortable, they're regulated, they're at ease. They might be smiling, they seem relaxed, they don't seem agitated, they don't seem upset, they don't seem angry. This isn't what will often happen, it does not always, but what will often happen is that's also when a lot of learning will happen. That's when the person on the spectrum might be more interactive. They might be looking at you more. They might be smiling at you more. They might be including you in their play more. They might be willing to be more flexible and go your way more. That's all during regulated times. Now, of course, the big mistake is that really that should be the only time when we're trying to help with that person with anything growth oriented, like learning something new or trying something new, or whatever. That really should only be happening in the regulated neurostate. And that is never what happens. Happens all over the place. And that goes to the third and final neurostate, which is regulating. This is the one that's least understood by most people because most people on the spectrum, when they're in a regulating neurostate, everybody treats them like they're in a regulated neurostate, and they're really not. Regulating means they're not dysregulated. They're not having a neurocrash. They're not screaming. They're not crying. Nothing like that. Oftentimes, they're doing things like stimming. Oftentimes, they are going to be less responsive in that state when you call their name or try and engage them. But they don't look distraught either. What's happening is they're not regulated, but they're trying to be. They're trying to be. That's why it's regulating. They're actually regulating themselves. Right? And we often interfere with that, try and stop them, all this. But that's what they're trying to do. And most people on the spectrum, when they're in that state, because they're not screaming and flipping out, they're treated like, oh, this is like a regulated state. So we are going to try and get them to participate in this activity and do this and communicate with us and do X and do Y and do Z. When actually when you do that, you break trust. That person is now going to be really feel not supported by you. And you're going to push them toward a neurocrash at the same time. You both those together. So understanding these three neurostates, when to spot them, and then understanding the fact that you have to actually be different with the person the autistic person. You have to be different with them based on which of these three states they're in. And you can't control the states. You can't demand, oh, hey, I know you're in a regulating state, but we have a lesson plan scheduled at 3:30. Can you just shift into a regulated state for me and then we can do that activity? And obviously that's not going to work. But so you've got to cater what you're doing to what their state is. And then, yes, when they shift back into a regulated state, which they will be able to do more often if you actually respect the states and don't overload them, then, yeah, when they're in a regulated state, you can try the things you might want to try if you're in a helping profession, for instance. So, anyway, those are the five natural laws of autism. I know that was a really long explanation, but yeah.
Those neurocrashes. So I've also read that you mentioned that there are 7 causes of neurocrashes. So could you tell us what they are?
I'm so glad you brought that up because yeah, I don't think people really realize how many of the things that they're doing day to day are actually causing this thing that nobody wants to happen. And I mean nobody. Like parents don't want it. The person on the spectrum really, really, really doesn't want it. Teachers and educators don't want it. Nobody wants it. So why is it happening all the time? Right? Because people don't realize nobody's doing this on purpose. Nobody's trying to be mean to these kids and adults on the spectrum, of course. But what's happening is they're doing one or often more, oftentimes even all 7 of these causes. So here's what they are. So first of all, the first one, and I find this one in a way to be the most profound, which is being around, this is a cause of neurocrashes, being around an adult or a parent or a caregiver or an educator who is emotionally agitated. Okay. Now, this is important because everybody thinks that, it's all about what you do with the person on the spectrum. If you want to help them, it's do this, but don't do that. But they don't take into consideration the monumental importance of it's how you are is even more important than that. If you are emotionally agitated when you are around your loved one on the spectrum, whether it's you're annoyed at them for something, you're having an agitation about them, but even if it has nothing to do with them, might be about your husband or your wife or something completely unrelated. Does not matter what the target of it is. If you are emotionally agitated for any reason around someone on the spectrum, that is highly dysregulating for the person on the spectrum. But why, right? Like, why would that be? Especially if I'm not actually, let's say, yelling at the person on the spectrum. Maybe I'm yelling at someone else, has nothing to do with them. Or maybe I'm not even yelling at all. I'm just annoyed and agitated, but I'm not voicing it. So why would this be such a big deal? It's actually the number one thing. It has a huge effect. First of all, and I'll just do another myth here, another myth buster here. People all the time, you've heard this, I'm sure you have, because you've done deep dives into this subject. Mind blindness. Oh, autistic people have mind blindness, right? I hear this all the time. And it's so funny to me because I kind of feel like autistic people have kind of anti-mind blindness. And what I mean by that is there is no one I have met on this earth, including myself, but all other people as well. There is no one who is as good at picking up on the emotional state of people than autistic people. I mean, I can go in to a store and if I'm having a really bad day and plant a smile on my face, act like I'm in a good place, and if that person's neurotypical at the counter, they're going to think I'm in a good mood. Like it's pretty easy to snow people in that way, unless they're close to you, right? Not your best friend, but people you don't know well. But if if I'm around any person on the spectrum, it doesn't matter if they know me well or they don't know me well. That's actually irrelevant to this point, which is anyone, uh, they're going to pick up on exactly where I am. Doesn't matter if I put a fake smile on, which I do not do for people on the spectrum. Why would I do that? What's the point? But it doesn't matter if I do or I don't. It doesn't matter if their parents do or don't. It doesn't matter if their teacher does or does. It doesn't matter what fake things they try to do to smooth it over. The person on the spectrum picks up on the deeper emotional state, on what I call the emotional frequency of the person, which is going to leak out of you in 100 different nonverbal ways, no matter what you do to cover it up, which is why you can't fake this one. You have to, in order for this to matter, you actually have to, for real, be in an emotionally non-agitated, regulated, comfortable place. If you are not, it causes neurocrashes. let me just say real quick, the reason why it does that is because so the person on the spectrum picks up on this emotional agitation. I'm not saying they're psychic and can read all the reasons why you feel that way. In fact, they probably don't know the reasons, but doesn't matter because they're picking up on the on that emotional frequency. And then two things happen. One is they experience that as a sensory tsunami, so it feels like a yet another sensory tidal wave, sensory overload that's coming at them. And yeah, that's number one. Number two is that you then get screened as a threat. You then seem like an unsafe person. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you're unsafe just because you're emotionally agitated or upset. I don't think that makes you unsafe to be around for the person on the spectrum, right? Of course not. If you're, especially if you're a parent who loves your kid, of course you're not unsafe. So I'm not talking about that you're unsafe. I'm talking about they're going to perceive you as unsafe. It will feel unsafe to them. So it doesn't matter how safe you think you are, that's how it's going to feel to them. So they're now around an unsafe person and they're experiencing a sensory tsunami that is going to shove them hard toward a neurocrash. Okay, that's the longest one. I won't take that long on all the others, but that's the most important. So one is being around a person who is emotionally agitated. Number two is being pushed. And I don't mean physically. I hope nobody's doing that. I mean emotionally pushed. This is when we're trying to push someone on the spectrum do something they don't want to do. We're being we're being intense about it. It includes things like not only trying to get them to do something that they don't want to do, but even things like rushing. I always say that rushing is the arch enemy of autism and the best friend of neurocrashes, baby. If you want more neurocrashes, do lots of rushing around people on the spectrum and rush them to do things. That's a great way to get more neurocrashes. So, but the rushing is a part of something larger, which is being pushed. People on the spectrum are very uncomfortable if they feel pushed, even if it's done in a subtle way, right? So that's number two. Number three, invasion of personal space. That's essentially what it sounds like, right? You're in their space. It can also include things like taking their stuff. So if someone has a toy or an object they like to hold or play with, and then you take that away, that's another invasion of personal space. I see people do this all the time, by the way, all the time, right? She doesn't need to have that toy with her. We're moving on to another activity. It's not even harming anyone that she has the toy. It feels better for her. It helps her regulate. No, let's get rid of it because we're busy on it, right? So that's another invasion of personal space. It's going to get you more neurocrashes. So that's number three. Number four is sensory overload, which I feel like we've touched on, but I just want to highlight, right? It builds up over time, the sensory overload, sights, sounds, things touching their skin, lots of things, smells, tastes, builds up over time. So sensory overload is a big cause of neurocrashes. Number five is unpredictability, not just unpredictable circumstances, but even more than that, people, especially neurotypical people, are often very unpredictable. They say they want dinner at 6, but then they say, "Oh, we're working late. We're not going to have dinner till 6:45." They sometimes they're in a good mood, sometimes they're in a bad mood. Sometimes, right? So it can be really tricky for someone on the spectrum, and it can feel very unpredictable. So the more predictable you can make yourself and what you're doing and the environment, the better. Number six is blurry boundaries. This is an interesting one, actually, because um, people think what I'm saying is so basically, I guess you just have to make your autistic loved one be like the boss of the house because I said give control. So if you're going to give control, they get to decide everything. They get to decide when dinner is. They get to decide what foods are eaten. They get to decide everything. Even I worked with I've done this with many parents, but I worked with set of parents in California, and they have a 21-year-old on the spectrum. A great guy. I love this kid. And he's not a kid, but he's an adult, but he's awesome. And he's 21 years old, and he's highly verbally communicative. Um, and what he wanted, I'll say, his parents to do is specifically his dad. So his dad could not come in the car with the family ever, so they couldn't do anything for years as a family. Um, the dad had to, and they were in Southern California where it's warm all year. The dad had to wear a sweater, particular color sweater. The dad who needed glasses to see was not allowed to wear his glasses, and the dad had to wear a baseball cap, like all that, which he didn't like doing. So he was kind of, you can understand him feeling kind of like he's a prisoner in his own home. And he thought what I was going to say is like, yeah, just do, the importance of giving control, what I was talking about earlier, just so you got to just do that. But actually, that comes to the sixth cause of neurocrashes, which is actually blurry boundaries, which is when you actually don't have boundaries or you have unclear boundaries about what you will and won't do. So this dad would sometimes wear the hat, sometimes not wear the hat. Then he tried to make an arrangement that he'd wear the hat, but just on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And this caused way more stress because it was a blurry boundary. Interestingly enough, once the dad decided, oh, actually, I'm gonna wear that. I'm not gonna not no longer wear a hat. I'm gonna wear my glasses. I'm gonna dress how I want, essentially in my house, but not as a punitive like punishment. Like I'm gonna do what I want and you can't tell me what to do, but more as a we have a special way of setting boundaries where it's a form of giving control actually, where we say, hey, listen, it's totally fine if you don't like me wearing my glasses. That's okay. You can even tell me how much you don't like it, and I will sit patiently and I will listen while you tell me that. Like I will take it. I get it. I want to hear how you're feeling about things. But since I need the glasses to see, I'm going to be wearing them. Even after you tell me how much you hate it, I'm going to still be wearing them because I do need to see. Right. So and what's interesting about the way we frame boundaries is that boundaries aren't about what your loved one can or cannot do. It's not about setting limits on the person. You can't do that. Boundaries are about what I will or will not do. So you can ask me to take my glasses off. That's fine, but I'm going to still be wearing them. Right. They with the actually the same with a same thing came up with a different person on the spectrum, also maybe 20, who wanted a $1,000 Lego set. And his parents couldn't afford that, but they were happy to buy him $35 Lego sets. And they were really stressed that he kept asking. And they were, oh, and they have to try to convince him why they can't. But actually, this created a super blurry boundary that resulted in lots of neurocrashes instead of being clear where they were able to go, look, and this is what we ended up doing. You can ask me every single day for $1,000 Lego set. And actually, I want to hear it. You can show me pictures on the internet of the set. You can tell me why you like it. I am so down with it. I want to hear about it. But since it's $1,000, we're not going to be buying it. In fact, we're not going to be buying any Lego sets that are over $35. But that doesn't mean you're not allowed to ask for any Lego set you want. So they didn't have to do battle with him to get him to like, hey, stop asking. I already told you I can't afford it. Right? It's more like, no, ask as much as you want. It's totally cool. And I really will listen. But just I'm not going to be able to buy anything over 35 bucks. So this is not a way of imposing something on the person on the spectrum. It's a way of, number one, the parent living a tenable and reasonable life. But more than that, it actually reduces neurocrashes because it gives the person, the autistic person, a sense of grounding of like, oh, this is how things work. This will happen, but this won't happen. And it's always going to work that way. I don't have to stress. Like when he was doing it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'll wear the hat. It stressed the daylights out of his son because the son never was always each day stressing about which is it going to be. Right. But once it was never, then he didn't like it for the first hour, but then it really mellowed out after that. So anyway, that's number 6. And the seventh and final cause of neurocrashes is something that we call biostorms. And they're what they sound like, biological storms. And they're intense, but they're also finite. They get very intense in the body, but then they pass. And that applies to things like foods that a lot of our loved ones, so many of us on the spectrum are just highly sensitive people, and have very sensitive systems, and so there might be certain foods or certain groups of foods that are sensitive, but it's not only foods. I had this thing. So I had this is long before I met my wife. I was in a very serious relationship with this woman who actually had a little boy with on the autism spectrum. It was such a cool little boy. It's really cool. The hardest part of the breakup, and we're still friends, as I say this, I'm still close with her. But the hardest part of the breakup was to break up with the little boy. Actually, that broke my heart. But anyway, we were living together and we were working with the little boy and all this stuff. And so he was very, very sensitive. So before that, I had been living on, as a bachelor and doing what I wanted. And I've been doing my own laundry since I was like 10 years old. So I would use bounce dryer sheets in the dryer. And I loved the smell of them. I loved they reduced static cling. It was great. But we stopped doing that because this little boy was very sensitive to that kind of stuff because he would have biostorms, actually. So anyway, we did that. Great. Then a year later, we break up. They move out. It was really hard, really, really hard. And, but I'm like, later, once I got over that, a few weeks later, I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I'm a bachelor again. I can use my dryer sheets again. So I start chucking them in the dryer. I'm like, this is great. And I was completely shocked what happened actually. First of all, a combination of the smell of the stuff on the clothes, which was like super toxic to me, and I didn't even realize it. And the not only the smell though, it made all my skin incredibly itchy because it's also leaves residue on your skin. I had no idea that these biostorms were happening until I took it away and then reintroduced it. This happens with a lot of our loved ones. We don't even realize they're having biostorms. It could be from cleaning materials, it could be from different dietary items. We don't even realize that that's what's causing this, or that they're sensitive to it because we're used to giving it to them, exposing them to it. Oftentimes when you take it away, that's when you'll see something. So biostorms by themselves can cause neurocrashes, just the biostorm part of it. So a lot of times when you make a big impact on that, you make a shift there, it can really make a huge difference with neurocrashes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what are the five autism love languages?
Oh, yeah. Well, look, remember I said earlier that, everybody, at least everybody I work with, loves their autistic loved one. That's why I call them an autistic loved one and not just like a person. So parents and even a lot of professionals adore the autistic people in their lives. But as I said earlier, we love them. But do we love them in a way that feels like love to them, that is actually received that way? Right? And oftentimes the answer is unfortunately no. Right? I am not questioning any parent or person's love for their autistic loved one. I know I work with these people every day. They love their autistic loved one more than anything, but it is not received as love by the autistic person in many cases because they're doing lots of things that are breaking trust and stressing their loved one out, and then they're not doing other things that could rebuild trust. So again, none of this is on purpose. I'm not blaming anyone, but then there's an adversarial relationship that develops. Right? I have so many parents I work with that feel like they have adversarial relationships and fighting with their loved ones on the spectrum. I have this with parents of 5-year-olds, parents of 13-year-olds, parents of 32-year-olds. Like, it doesn't matter the age. I get this a lot. So the one of the things that Kate and I teach people to implement is the 5 autism love languages. This is not something you would do during a neurocrash or anything like that. This is during the other times, right? The times when you're hanging out together or when you're spending some time with them and they're not right in the middle of a neurocrash or a deeply dysregulated period. And they're just simple things. It's not rocket science, not brain surgery. But if you do these things consistently, your love will translate much better. And look, every autistic person is different. I don't mean to paint everyone with one brush. That's why there's 5 autism love languages actually, because some are received more strongly by certain people who are autistic than others, right? But let me go through what they are. They're not, like I said, they're not complicated, so it shouldn't take me long, but I just want to tell you what they are. One is, and by the way, I do want to acknowledge something. Of course, that term is based on the original idea, the book that came out in the 90s called The 5 Love Languages. That was a book written for neurotypical couples about how each person in the partnership can express love in a way that the other person will receive. So I do acknowledge that's where the inspiration came, but these are very different love languages than in that book. So anyway, the first one's called offers of service, but that is things like could be offering deep pressure, offering them a dish that they like, a food that they like, offering to read their favorite book to them. So that's the first one, offers of service. Number two, and I'm surprised at how few people do this one, is immediate responsiveness, which means, again, if it's doable, I'm not saying do this if it's not doable, but if it's doable, really quickly getting them what they are asking for or really quickly answering their questions. Yes, even if it's the 20th time they've asked the question, still really being responsive and answering it. The number of people that I work with who are just either not very responsive or they take forever to respond, and they have reasons for that. I'm not saying they're doing it to be mean, but it's a lot of people. So being more quickly like, I'm interested, I'm responding here as best I can is powerful. Um, Number three, a friendly face. This is really important. Again, people think autistic people can't read faces. They don't read faces. They don't look at faces. They don't. I am telling you that how you are holding your face makes a huge difference because it's communicating other things. It's communicating whether you're a threat or whether you're welcoming. It's communicating whether you're safe or whether you're not. So a friendly face means just having a sincere, warm and caring expression by essentially letting your love show on your face. That's number three. Number four is words of support. So that's the one that people are probably best acquainted with. That could mean anything from saying, I want to help you to thank you for telling me that to I love you or you're awesome or hey, you're doing great or hey, I know this is hard for you. But really communicating words, supportive words. Even if, by the way, that's true, even if your loved one is not displaying traditional speech, they are still receiving a lot more than you think they are. And then the last one, number five, and this is my favorite one. This is my favorite one. I would argue this is the most important one. This is often underutilized, and it's called interest in their interest. Interest in their interest. And it means showing a sincere interest in what your loved one on the spectrum likes, values, enjoys, and is interested in, talking about their subjects, playing their games, not rolling your eyes when they ask you because they've asked you, they already asked you 5 times. And, oh, why do I have to do this? Right? That's not interest in their interest. Right? Interest in their interest is powerful, really powerful. I wouldn't be surprised if that played into why that guy that you worked with was so responsive to you, Akansh. Is like I don't know for sure because I wasn't there watching, but I would bet you probably were showing him interest in his interest. And that's really, really powerful, really powerful. So yeah, those are the five autism love languages.
Thank you. And I
Yeah,
wanted to put kind of like a case in front of you, like, as to like,
sure.
for some parents and educators where they have like highly verbal autistic loved ones who can struggle like, with voicing a desire or do something that could be traumatic, such as like, saying I want to punch that cop or like which is just like, them expressing their emotions. And like I'm sure a lot of people like or like I want to punch that kid because he's been saying things that are really mean, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean that's like something a lot of people might have a thought in their head, but you don't say it because like
Yeah,
like
you don't say it. That's right. Yeah, because there's gonna be consequences if you say it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's really actually that's super common. So with people who are highly verbally expressive who are on the spectrum, it is very common. I actually had a guy I worked with. He was oh actually he might have now he's in his late 20s, but when I was originally working with him, he was like 18 or so, 18 or 19. And actually I started working with him when he was 15, but this particular issue came up when he was 18. So he started telling people he actually did say that thing you said. He actually said, I want to beat up some cops. That was his word for word thing, what he said, right? Everybody lost their minds, right? They lost their minds because they were worried for him, right? Understandably, I'm not faulting anybody. I get it, right? They were worried for two things. One, they thought he might do it. And by the way, was like a 300-pound giant guy. So like he could make good on that threat, right? So number one, they were worried he would do it and something terrible would happen to him. Number two, they were also just worried about him saying it, even if he didn't do it. They were like, hey, you could get in trouble just for walking around and making that kind of a comment, right? If you say it in front of the wrong person, right? So these are legitimate worries. I don't fault anybody for having those worries because they cared about him. They want something bad to happen to him. But because they were worried, they acted super emotionally agitated around it, as we talked about before. This is a problem. And they acted very emotionally agitated and they set up control battles around it, which is like the worst possible thing you could do. Meaning control battles, meaning don't say that, don't do it, don't say it, don't talk about it. Right. This is also very, very counterproductive. And it was counterproductive. It didn't make this any better. In fact, he kind of escalated this as they were doing this more. And that's kind of why I was called onto the scene, actually, to talk to him. And I did this thing with him that Kate and I do with a lot of people who are more verbally communicative, who are on the spectrum. And we call it taxi driver decisional assistance, which I know is a very weird and strange name, but it's called taxi driver decisional assistance. And there's a reason why, which I'll tell you in a second why it's called taxi driver. But basically, it had to start with like, we had to find a way to address this in a way that wasn't going to make him feel unsafe, wasn't going to precipitate a control battle, but was going to keep him safe and keep him from doing something that could get him either killed or thrown in jail or thrown in an institution somewhere. So, so the first thing when he said it to me, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And he was shocked because that's not what anybody else did, right? They were all trying to shut him up and shut him down. So he told me more about it, and oh, why do you want to do that? And by the way, I just think it's important for the story. He was like a white kid that was like the color of Elmer's glue, and I say this because the reason he told me, which by the way, nobody knew this because nobody was asking him why he felt this way. Everyone's just trying to shut him down. But I was like genuinely curious. So he actually explained it to me. And I explained it to his parents who didn't know this before, which is basically he felt like, in his view of things, not saying it was accurate or not accurate, but his view was police officers beat up and mistreat Black people. And so that's not okay. And so they deserve to get beat up by me, right? That was his perspective on it. By the way, I gotta give this guy some credit. This was well before 2020. This was before the George Floyd thing and the Black Lives Matter. This was early on. He already had this kind of consciousness about it. So anyway, so that was where he was coming from. Now this opened some doors for us to discuss, like, oh, well, why do you think that's what the police officers are doing, and why do you think this is the way that's going to resolve it? But like, we got into it. But here's where the taxi driver part comes in. So one of the things I do when I'm working with anyone who is more highly verbal on the spectrum, and we can have the back and forth conversation like that, is I'll say, look, I'm the taxi driver and you're the passenger in the taxi. And what that means is you get to decide where the taxi goes. You get to decide what you want for yourself, what you want in your life. You get to decide that. I'm not here to tell you what you should do, what you should want. But I'm the taxi driver. I'm trying to get you there. So it is my job to tell you, hey, we could take Fifth Avenue, but there's a huge traffic stop there. It's going to take an extra 45 minutes, or there's a pothole in the road, or whatever. It's my job to so it's, in a sense, it's setting up a metaphor for the person on the spectrum, which I have to, some people have said, well, they're going to really understand that. I have to tell you, when I set this up, they always understand it and they love it. They're like, yeah, I've had people come up to me, who I'm working with, they'll say, okay, I want you to be the taxi driver now. And they mean it metaphorically. They don't mean they want me to drive a taxi. So anyway, I did this with this guy, and I explained that to him and everything. And so I tried to get what it allows you to do is get to what the person really wants. So I worked with someone else who wanted to go up to essentially a random woman and tell her she was sexy. And he was old enough that that would be a problem, a real problem. And so instead of saying, don't do that, what can happen? I asked him about it, what he wants. And by being the taxi driver, I could find out. So in that case, he wanted a relationship connection to a woman. So actually, okay, we can work on that. That we can work on. That is because part of my job as the taxi driver is to tell you, if that's what you want, telling a woman she's sexy that you don't know is not going to get you there, right? And I did the same thing with the one who wanted to beat up the police officers. And actually, I got to tell you what happened after I did that. Now, it took place over a couple of conversations. It didn't happen in like 15 minutes. It wasn't like magic. But what happened with the guy who wanted to beat up the police officers, was he completely changed his mind without me pushing him to change his mind. He changed his mind. He decided he didn't want to do it. He wasn't going to do it, and he wasn't going to keep saying that. He decided that. And he, no joke, with no solicitation from me, he thanked me. He actually said, oh, thank you for like talking to me about this. So this is what's possible. I'm not saying every conversation is going to turn out perfectly like that, because we're all human beings. Autistic people are human beings. Neurotypical people are human beings. So it's not like a manipulation technique that gets you. It's a way of connecting with someone, helping them feel safe and understood, not having a control battle, and also discovering what the person really wants and helping them get it in a way that isn't going to be destructive to them or anyone else. So that kind of stuff does come up. Now, one last thing I'll say is that Kate and I also work with a lot of people and families who have people on the spectrum who are at a different level than those people and are not yet able to express themselves with words, even through typing. We also work with people who do it through typing, but not verbally, but then also people who are doing neither. So we're going to obviously approach each type of person in each situation differently. But this is sort of a niche type situation that occurs just with people who are more like outwardly verbally communicative.
Thank you. And what do you think about the idea that people can quote unquote recover from autism? And I asked you that because you used to refer to yourself that way, but you don't anymore.
That is definitely true. That's definitely true. In my book that I wrote, I don't know, 12 years ago, maybe, I did specifically say, like, I fully recovered from autism. Like, I did say that. And not just in the book. Like, I had said it for years before I wrote the book. I said it in interviews. I said it in articles that I wrote about, right? And I want to give people a little bit of a backstory here because you have to understand, given what my experience was growing up, I came under, like, as soon as I was even a teenager, even before I was an adult, this happened to me, Akansh, which is I would get attacked, like just me, like even 15-year-old me, not trying to hurt anybody. I would get attacked, not physically, of course, verbally, by people saying, you're, uh, you're giving false hope. You shouldn't say that. Autism can't be recovered, and very, very angry responses. But here's the thing to understand. I'm talking about like the late 80s and the 90s. So what you to understand is this was not autistic people saying this to me. This was basically old school therapists and old school ABA therapists and other types of therapists who were super pessimistic about the very kids they were working with, and also were using highly coercive methods to try to help these kids and adults on the spectrum. And so I'll be honest with you, I was kind of happy and proud to have these people think that I mean, they weren't my enemy. I wasn't angry at them, but I was happy to be attacked by them, happy for them to hate me because I was like, I saw myself, and I'm not saying I was in the right here, but I'm just saying this is where I was at. I saw myself as sort of on the opposite end of that. Like I supported non-coercive ways of being on people on the spectrum. And I believe that people on the spectrum could accomplish all different kinds of things. And I had seen it many, many, many times with my own eyes, not just with myself, but with a lot of other people and with a lot of people that I loved and cared about, including my own niece. So just a lot of people. So anyway, so this went on for decades, this kind of situation. So I got very entrenched in that. Also, my parents raised me to believe, so have that perspective and refer to it that way. And I don't fault them for it either. Again, we're going back more than a generation here. So this is what I grew up under. This is what I experienced. And so I just took it for granted. Like, hey, this is how I'm going to refer to myself. This is what happens. Now, something then started happening several years ago, which was I started getting, with the advent of social media and stuff, communicated to by autistic adults and autistic teenagers who were telling me, "Hey, this is hurting us. Like this hurts me. This makes it sound like autism is a terrible disease," which is never ever something I said or something that I felt, but I didn't think it was unreasonable what they were saying. It's making it sound like it's some disease. It's making people want to like cure us and stamp out the autism and make people not autistic and see autism as a bad thing and all of this. And so I had to really think about this because I didn't mind the old school ABA therapist hating me. That was fine with me. But this really mattered to me. I'm like, these are my people. These are my people. I don't want these people to feel hurt by what I'm doing. So that was the start of it, but it wasn't the end of it. So first I just decided, just from a position of like, I love these people. I don't want them to be hurt by that. I decided like, hey, I'm not going to use that language anymore. Right. But then it went a lot deeper, actually, because then I started going, well, hold on a second. Like, what am I? What am I? Like, am I a person who like has no autism, or am I an autistic person who's just done all these things in his life? And like, I like really thought about it. Like, it was very profound for me. I gotta say, it was very profound when I met my wife. I was still in the like recovered place in my head. So she didn't know my history when she first fell in love with me, but so this was like, and she's not on the spectrum or anything like that, and has no history, and actually didn't even really know what autism was when she met me. But the thing about this is like, it was deep soul searching for me. It was really hard, man. It was hard because because it was like a self identity thing. I was like, what am I? What am I? And so then I came to this place of, well, hold on. I'm like, what so what if I'm like I maybe I am autistic? Like who cares one way or the other? Like, and so I became a little more like, not just I don't want to use the words because I don't want to hurt anybody, but more like actually maybe the word isn't even accurate anyway. Even if the word didn't hurt anybody, maybe it's just not who I am. So I was like, okay, like I'm cool to like not just identify as someone who journeyed with autism, but like an autistic person who was that, and it was huge for me. You see, I don't know if you can see, I'm wearing this pin, but it says neuro spicy. And that's how I think of myself. I think of myself as neuro spicy. And so I yeah, it was a big shift. So yeah, I never ever now I can say what happened to me and all the amazing ways that my parents helped me. Doesn't take that away, it doesn't take the journey away, but it just doesn't have to mean that I went from autistic to like not autistic and like erased, or not even erased is the wrong word, but like, w went through and recovered from autism. But just like, yeah, I grew and blossomed in a whole bunch of ways. I was this way of being autistic before, and now I'm this way of being. So anyway, that's kind of where I landed with it.
Thank you. And if people want your help or want to be trained in the Safe to Connect autism approach or the ACT protocol, how can they do that?
Oh, well, okay. So just since we're talking about that, I'll just tell you real quick. So first, I just want to remind people they can go to stoppingstims.com. That's not answering your question, Akansh. I just want to remind people from the earlier discussion, Stop Stopping Stims. That's all just about being part of the movement and it's a very simple website, very simple. And it won't ask you for any money or anything like that. But to be part of the movement to get the world to stop stopping stims. So that's great. Now, if they want to actually engage with the Safe to Connect autism approach and the ACT protocol and all that, they would go to safetoconnectapproach.com, safetoconnectapproach.com. That's Kate and I's centralized website. And actually it addresses work that applies if you're a parent who just wants help, or you want help for your loved one on the spectrum, or for yourself or for your family. There's a piece of the website that addresses that. There is a great piece of it that's for professionals, and we train and certify professionals to implement this approach with whatever they're already doing, like OT or SLP, etc. We have a professional certification course that's actually starting at the beginning of April, and it's 6 months long, and it's like 90% online. There is one 3 day in-person section of it, but the vast majority of it is online over Zoom. And so if people want to be part of that, they can just go to that website. You can definitely find that there. It's very easy to navigate, really easy to find. There's also resources there. There's a lot of free resources. Obviously, there's things, if you're going to work, let's say one-on-one with me or with Kate, that's gonna cost you. But there's a lot of free resources there. There's also very some all the resources that are very inexpensive that are like recorded simple recorded group courses, that you can sign up for there that address a bunch of different autism related subjects. And then I'll just say one other thing. People can go, I have a LinkedIn and different things, but mostly if you're on Facebook, you can go to my Facebook page. It's just, Raun K Kaufman, or it's facebook.com/RAUN.K.Kaufman. Anyway, or you can just look me up. But I post things a lot on my Facebook page, but more importantly, I offer a free weekly thing almost every week. And it's Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern US time. Obviously, it doesn't cost you anything. And I have first I do a talk. It's a different subject every week. So I do a deep dive on some particular subject, and then I open it up to Q&A. You can ask me questions about the subject I just talked about, or I got to tell you, you can ask me questions about anything that you need help with, right? The whole idea is it was a way for me to put some time in every week to giving people free direct help that they wouldn't, regardless of their financial situation, they wouldn't have to pay for. Um, like I said, working directly with me is pricey. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. It is. But I try to give people a way to access it who don't have a lot of financial means. That's one key way that I do on Facebook. So anyone can access that who's listening that wants to be a part of that or get more information in that way.
And then is there anything else you'd like to share or say to anybody?
Um, I'll just say this. I'll just say a few things. Actually, I had two quick things. So one is if any of you listening are autistic, um, you may have gotten lots of different messages about what that means about you, what you're capable of and not capable of. And so I hope that your this conversation with me can, and maybe not only this conversation, maybe other things too, can really maybe kind of connect with you in some way and give you an opportunity to think about like, hey, number one, there is nothing wrong with you, right? There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with not only just wrong with you and with your autism, but there's just nothing wrong with anything you do as part of your autism. There's nothing wrong with who you are. You don't have to change to conform to someone else's expectations or desires. That doesn't mean it won't really be awesome in your life if you decide to stretch and grow yourself according to your own dreams. Because I do think whether you're on the spectrum or you're not, that's that's a key part of living a fulfilled life for many, many people. So I just throw that at you. But fundamentally, you don't have there's no have to on that. And I hope you can see the beauty and the awesomeness in who and how you are. That's number one. And then number two, if you are a parent of someone on the spectrum, I, I hope that you can really, and a professional too, if you're a professional as well, I hope you can see the value of really trying to approach your loved one like from the inside and not from the outside. Approaching it from the outside is like, here's this person, even if it's a person you love, here's this person, here's what's like wrong with them, here's what needs to be either fixed or changed, or even if you're not using words like fix, but here's the thing they need to catch up on, or we need to do, and here's the thing they need to do less of because it's disruptive. And that's like the outsider's point of view. I understand why you might think that way. The whole world encourages you to see it that way. So I get it. Probably your own family encourages you to see it like that, like your extended family and your cousins and maybe your parents and your sisters and brothers probably encourage you to see your loved one that way. So I get it. But this is like, uh, it's really, really important to get this piece of if we can come at it from the inside, that's where the difference can be made. So the outside is, I'm looking at this person, this is what they're missing, this is what they need, this is right, all that. The insider's perspective comes from, okay, what's this person's life experience like? What do they want? What's important to them? Why are they feeling, if they are doing something that I'm finding difficult, maybe they are, why are they feeling the need to do that? They must be feeling the need to do that for a really important reason. What is that reason? And then finally, in terms of that insider's questioning, how can I help that person who I love feel safe, feel at ease, feel regulated, and have that as their life experience? How can I help that to happen? So if that can be your approach, that coming from the inside versus coming at it from the outside, that's like that's the best gift you can give your loved one on the spectrum.
Mr. Kaufman,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us. Your
Welcome.
perspective on autism and the power of like connection, being kind, and like, supporting the people you care about has been like truly inspiring. And
I
like your
appreciate that.
commitment to like empowering families and like advocating for this kind of like, um, I guess like insider and like centered approach that actually like, really looks at the people you're working with, um, is like, such a great, and like, like when I hear it, I'm like, that makes sense. Why didn't I think of that earlier, right? And I feel like
Yeah, I get it.
that's something I'm definitely gonna like make sure to embody a lot more, like, in my volunteering, and I hope like,
Oh,
the people who
I'm
see
happy to
this
hear
will
that.
as well.
That is all that actually, if nothing else comes from it, if we get zero listeners, really, if just from what you told me, that like makes the whole thing worth it. That is just awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna be high on that for the rest of the week. Really, I really appreciate that. That's magnificent.
Thank you so much for doing this.